My name is Mike, and I'm just an average guy living in a quiet suburban neighborhood. My life was pretty mundane, working a basic 9-to-5 job, watching sports on the weekends, and just trying to get by. Well, that all changed when a new family moved in next door. The Johnson family. At first, everything seemed normal. A couple moved in with their 2 kids, a dog, and a minivan. Well, it didn't take long for me to realize that things weren't quite as they seemed. The Johnson family kept to themselves mostly. I rarely saw them go outside, and when I did, it was always brief. They would exchange pleasantries, nothing out of the ordinary. That is, until one night when I heard a commotion coming from their house. It was a regular Tuesday evening, and I was just lounging on the couch, flipping through channels, when the sound of raised voices caught my attention. At first, I thought it was just a family argument. It happens to the best of us, but as the shouting continued, it became clear that this was something more. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate. I tiptoed over to my front window and peeked through the blinds. The Johnsons' living room lights were on, and shadows danced on the walls as the heated argument escalated. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but their tone was chilling enough for me to know that it had to be very serious. Just as I was debating whether to intervene or mind my own business, I heard their front door slam shut. I watched as Mr. Johnson stormed out. His face was a mix of anger and frustration. He got into his car and peeled out of the driveway, leaving the house in an eerie silence. Now, most people would probably just shrug it off, but something about that night stuck with me. Maybe it was the intensity of the argument or the fact that I had never seen such a heated altercation from the seemingly ordinary Johnson family. Either way, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Days turned into weeks, and the Johnsons' house remained quiet. There was no sign of Mr. Johnson, and the rest of the family seemed to be keeping a low profile. I figured they were dealing with their own personal issues, so I decided to give them space. Then came the night that sent shivers down my spine. It was around midnight, and I was just about to hit the hay when I heard a strange noise outside my bedroom window. It was a faint scraping sound, like someone was trying to be stealthy. I got out of bed and tiptoed towards the window with my heart pounding in my chest. I peered through the curtains and nearly shit myself. There, in the dim glow of the street lamp, I saw a figure crouched by the Johnsons' front door, dressed in dark clothing and wearing a ski mask. The intruder was trying to pick the lock. Fear gripped me, but curiosity kept me rooted to the spot. I couldn't believe what I was witnessing, a potential break-in right next door. My mind raced as I debated whether to call the cops or confront the intruder myself. As if on cue, the front door creaked open and the thief slipped inside. My stomach churned as I realized that this wasn't just any robber. This person knew the Johnson family. They even knew the layout of their home. My instincts kicked in and I dialed 911, whispering frantically to the operator about the unfolding situation. I watched as the intruder moved through the house. Their actions were deliberate and unsettlingly familiar. With the layout within minutes, the distant wail of sirens filled the night, growing louder as the police closed in on the scene. I continued to watch from my hiding spot, fearing for the safety of the Johnson family. The thief must have sensed the impending danger because, with a sudden burst of urgency, they rushed towards the front door. I held my breath as they made a hasty escape, disappearing into the darkness just as the police car screeched to a halt in front of the house. Officers searched the property, flashlights cutting through the night. I waited anxiously, hoping they would catch the intruder and put an end to this nightmare. It felt like an eternity, but eventually, they emerged from the house empty-handed. As it turned out, the thief had managed to slip away, leaving behind a house that felt violated and an entire neighborhood on edge. The police questioned Mrs. Johnson, and that's when the unsettling truth came to light. Mr. Johnson wasn't away on a business trip as the family had claimed. He was the intruder. Well, it turned out that the seemingly ordinary family harbored a dark secret. Mr. Johnson had been leading a double life, breaking into houses, stealing valuables, and maintaining a facade of normalcy during the day. The argument I had witnessed weeks earlier was likely a result of the mounting pressure and stress of his criminal activities. This revelation sent shockwaves through our tight-knit community. In the aftermath, the Johnsons disappeared, leaving their house abandoned and a chilling void in our once serene neighborhood. My name is Ria, and my story begins with a new neighbor named Peter. When he first moved into the apartment next to mine, we quickly became friends. He seemed friendly and outgoing, making the effort to strike up conversations whenever we crossed paths. Little did I know that this person I considered to be a friend would turn into something far more sinister. In the beginning, Peter's company was enjoyable. We'd share small talk in the hallway, grab coffee, and occasionally watch movies at each other's place. Everything seemed normal, or so I thought. One night after a movie marathon at Peter's apartment, I began to notice some unsettling behavior from him. He became overly possessive, insisting on knowing my schedule and showing up at my place unannounced. I was alarmed after that and changed the locks, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. Things took a dark turn after that. I started finding notes with cryptic messages hidden among my belongings. The once friendly atmosphere turned into a constant state of fear. I knew Peter was behind it, but confronting him seemed too dangerous. One night as I laid in bed, I heard the sound of someone moving around my apartment. I was terrified, and I realized Peter had managed to get in again. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and slipped out through the back door, seeking refuge at a friend's place. The next day, I decided to sever ties with Peter. I confronted him about his intrusive actions, but he played innocent, denying any wrongdoing. Determined to escape this toxic friendship, I distanced myself, changed my routines, and sought support from friends. But Peter wasn't ready to let go. He continued his relentless pursuit, leaving gifts and notes outside my door. The line between friendship and obsession blurred, and I felt trapped in a nightmare. One day as I returned home, I found my apartment in a mess. Things were scattered around, drawers were pulled out, and it was clear someone had gone through my stuff without my permission. It was a violation that pushed me to my breaking point. Fear turned into anger, and I went to the police, filing a report against Peter for harassment and breaking into my apartment. With the help of the authorities, I obtained a restraining order against him. The escape became a legal battle, and Peter was forced to stay away. The process was emotionally draining, but it was a crucial step in reclaiming my sense of security. Moving forward, I surrounded myself with a strong support system and friends who understood the gravity of the situation. The court order served as a shield, allowing me to rebuild my life without the constant threat of Peter's presence. My name is Samuel, and up until a few months ago, I thought I had a pretty normal life. I lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood surrounded by friendly faces and white-picket fences. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other by name, and we exchanged pleasantries over the backyard fence. My next-door neighbor, Mr. Jennings, seemed like just another friendly face in the neighborhood. He was an older gentleman, probably in his late 60s, with thinning gray hair and a slight hunchback. He always had a warm smile on his face, and he'd wave at me whenever he saw me working on my car or mowing the lawn. I never had a reason to think twice about him until that one fateful night when it all started. Innocently enough, I was coming home late from work, tired and hungry as hell. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed Mr. Jennings in his backyard tending to his garden. I gave him a casual nod and headed inside, eager to kick off my shoes, eat, and relax. The next morning, as I sipped my coffee and glanced out the kitchen window, I noticed something strange. Mr. Jennings was standing at the edge of his yard, staring directly at my house. His smile was gone, replaced by an intense, almost predatory gaze. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I brushed it off as a trick of the light or a product of my tired mind. Days passed, and Mr. Jennings' behavior only grew stranger. I would catch glimpses of him watching me through his living room window, his eyes following my every move. Whenever I left the house, he seemed to appear out of nowhere, striking up awkward conversations about the weather or the latest news. One evening, I was working in my garage when I heard a noise outside. I peered through the window to see Mr. Jennings loitering near my trash cans. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, but I convinced myself it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. As the weeks went by, I became increasingly uneasy. It was as if Mr. Jennings had made it his mission to invade my personal space. I'd catch him snooping around my property. My friendly neighbor had transformed into an unsettling presence that really spooked me out. One night, unable to shake the feeling of being watched, I decided to confront Mr. Jennings. I knocked on his front door, my heart pounding in my chest. When he opened the door, he greeted me with his usual smile, but his eyes betrayed a cold, calculating look. "Hey, Mr. Jennings, I've noticed you've been spending a lot of time near my house lately. Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. He chuckled nervously, his smile never faltering. "Oh, I'm just admiring your lovely home, Samuel. Nothing to worry about." I couldn't put my finger on it, but something about his response set off alarm bells in my head. I decided to keep a closer eye on him, and that's when I made a shocking discovery. Late one night, I was awakened by a strange noise outside. I peered through my bedroom window, and guess who I saw? Mr. Jennings. He was dressed in dark clothing, sneaking around my backyard. My heart raced as I watched him approach my shed. Without hesitation, he picked the lock and disappeared inside. I knew I had to act quickly, so I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering details about my neighbor's suspicious behavior and the break-in. As I waited for the authorities to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was dealing with more than just a nosy neighbor. When the police arrived, they caught Miss Jennings inside my shed, and to my horror, they discovered a stash of stolen items, tools, electronics, and even personal motos that I thought I had misplaced over the weeks. As they handcuffed him, Mr. Jennings glared at me with a hatred that made me really uncomfortable. It turned out that my seemingly friendly neighbor was a seasoned thief, preying on the trust of those around him. He had used his neighborly facade to infiltrate our lives, learning our routines and exploiting our vulnerabilities. The realization hit me as the person I thought I knew was nothing more than a wolf who was waiting for the right moment to strike. This is a short story, but it's definitely worth telling because it freaked me the hell out. Well, a number of years ago, a storm blew down a big section of fence between my yard and the house behind me. I went out to check the damage before work, and the neighbor from the house behind me came over. I had never met him before. He was a big guy in sweats, reeking of cigarettes and body odor with snot hanging from his nose. We started out talking about the fence, but it soon devolved into him telling me all about his lousy life, his nervous breakdown, his wife leaving him, his son getting married and pushing him away, and on and on and on. I had bigger fish to fry. I really didn't care what he had to say about anything in his life, honestly. But all the while telling me all these things about his life, he was standing way too close to me, which of course made me step back, only to have him close the gap again. He was really persistent, and it was starting to put me on edge. And so our dance began. He effectively ended up chasing me in slow circles around the yard for about an hour because no matter how many times I said I needed to go, he just wouldn't shut the fuck up. He was like an Energizer bunny, just yapping nonstop and standing close as fuck to me. I was too polite to tell him to shut the fuck up, though, and needed his goodwill for mutual fence fixing. He was well-intentioned, but obviously mentally ill. The whole incident really creeped me out. I ended up paying for the whole fence repair because he had no money. For a couple years after that, he kept leaving food on my doorstep or in the backyard. He'd even sometimes throw candy bars over the fence. Again, well-intentioned but super creepy. I was so relieved when he finally moved out. I had this crazy neighbor that I will be calling Crazy Paula. Just for context, my house is in a cul-de-sac, with my house being at the entrance and Crazy Paula's being at the very far end. This bitch was crazy. I remember when I was a child, she would become infuriated when me and my brother would play football outside our own house. Like, bitch? It's our own house. The fuck are you tripping on? We were a solid 100 to 150 meters away from her house. She called the police on us once when we were just 9 and 11. They showed up and laughed when they found out what was happening and told her not to waste their time. Come on, who calls the cops on a 9 and 10-year-old playing at their own house? About a week later, we were outside playing again and we seen her getting into her car. We assumed she was driving out of the street, so we stepped onto the pavement. But nope, she gunned her car straight at us. We jumped out of the way and she went straight into the wall behind us. Then she called the police and said we made her crash her car. Can you believe this psycho? She got arrested after that, and I'm pretty sure she ended up in a mental hospital or asylum because she was a total nutcase. We never seen her ass again after that. I lived in Center City, Philly when this happened, and I was finishing my final semester at college. Our apartment shared a stoop with a guy who, to this day, I never learned his name. I only saw him once, just at the scene. His house was a typical 3-story townhome. We lived at Broad and Spring Garden, a block or two off. It's a decent enough area, not as scary as some of the city above us, thankfully. We have 2 Drexel College professors as our neighbors, and above them in my building are lawyers. They had a typical 3-story row home with a beautiful bow window that ran the entire height of the building. There were roughly 125 windows on the facade of the house, all of which we covered in tin foil, and in each window is a covered slit in the tin foil, so they could lift up the cover and peek through the slit if they wanted to see what was going on. Below on his door, the following was spray-painted: "Go away, don't sit on the steps, don't leave trash, etc." But every now and then we would. The little slits open, especially on the main floor, and his eyes would just scan the area. We could hear him through our walls, constantly banging around his house, screaming about monsters and God knows what else. One time, and I literally mean only one time, we saw him outside cutting the tree branches from the tree in front of our homes, and he was standing on a ladder with a chainsaw for what could easily be done with a pair of hand cutters. He then jumped off the ladder at some point after throwing down the chainsaw and landed square on the roof of my car below, screaming about how it shouldn't be parked there. It was a perfectly legal spot. I parked there every chance I got. I was absolutely pissed the hell off about that and called the police. I ended up filing a police report and he got fined and had to pay for the damage he did to my car. We lived there for about a year before we moved out. I don't miss that area at all. One night, at 2:30 a.m., when I was around 12, I was walking home from the little play area at the end of my street, and this random woman shouted and waved at me to come over to her house. She asked if I wanted to see her Lego models. I said yes and went into her house. Sure enough, she had the most amazing Lego stuff set up in her front room. Things like Star Wars ships built to a massive scale way before those Lego sets were a thing. I had a look at them and told her I liked them. I then left, and this never happened again, and I don't think I told anyone about it at the time. She lived alone, was probably in her 40s, and didn't live on the street for very long. I had no idea what her story was, but if it had happened today, she'd almost certainly have been questioned by the police. Fast forward 15 years, and I moved into my new home. When I moved in, I quickly noticed I had an alcoholic as a neighbor, and she had a son who was about 18 years old. She seemed harmless but was very loud. She was so loud that you could hear her ass from down the street. But again, she was friendly and harmless, so I didn't get too alarmed. However, the son seemed worried about his mom all the time, and with me being an empath, I worried for him. He used to tell me he didn't want his mom to drink, but then would go to the shop and buy her booze. At first, he seemed like a decent kid in a shitty situation. I remember thinking he was a bit of a creep when he caught me walking into my house one day with my shopping bags in hand. He asked me if I had seen some strange lights over the road from my house. Our houses overlooked fields and horse stables, but in the distance you could see the lights of the next village or town. There's a narrow road going down past these fields, so sometimes at night. My bedroom that faces that way gets lit up with the headlights of cars approaching. I gave all these reasons and explanations to him, basically saying no, I hadn't seen the lights, but maybe it was one of them he saw. I just shrugged, thinking it was no big deal, and got on with my day. A few weeks later, though, at around 10 p.m., I was startled by loud banging on my front door. Now, I lived alone with a toddler at the time, so I would usually have ignored it, but I heard my name being called and I recognized the son's voice, thinking something had happened to his mom or God knows what. Maybe she had drunkenly fallen over or something. She did that a lot. I ran to the door and opened it. "What's up? Is everything okay?" He just stood there and stared at me for a few seconds, his eyes looking like he'd seen a ghost. "Oh, thank God you answered. I know this is gonna sound crazy, but I had this crazy dream about an evil spirit in my bedroom, and it went through the wall that goes into your house, and I thought he was going to hurt your kid. I was worried and told myself, I just had to see if you and the kid were okay. Just keep an eye out, okay?" And off he went, back to his house. I thought that was strange, but thankfully they moved out a few months after that. I didn't know how much longer I could keep hiding from them whenever I spotted them when leaving my house. What a huge relief.